Hello everyone, this is Northstar and welcome to this segment on selling my watches. The title itself, though, is somewhat misleading. Rather, more correct title should be watches that I used to own, which I really loved vehemently. Watches I really cared about, but which I nevertheless sold because each one of them had one significant flaw or defect I simply couldn't accept or live with. And I really mean cons, flaws, defects so significant that even though someone would offer me the chance of buying them back, owning them for a second time would still pose a dilemma, or the exact same dilemma as when I possessed them back in the day. So, starting with my Satina Action Diver, which almost became my signature watch, I really loved this watch. I cannot emphasize enough, convey enough to you how much I loved this watch. I had 3 different models of this watch, plus the diver chronograph version with the Valjoux 7750. I adored this watch, revered this watch to an extent of which you would find it hard to comprehend. The ETA 2824-2 movement was, of course, somewhat a bit dull or tedious, but it was a really cool and extremely versatile timepiece for everyday use. The watch, however, had one significant flaw, a defect so significant that I simply couldn't live with it and took the decision of never wearing it again. It turned out that after wearing it in the sun for almost a year, the bezel indices would turn yellow. And I'm not talking about with a nice patina like faded color that you see on classic vintage watches. No, rather the coloration was a really shabby yellowish coloration, a coloration that made you go, ew, like an old man with old piss stains on his underwear. It simply became the piss stain watch, which made you go, no, you do not get to turn prematurely yellow on me at such an early stage. Clearly, we were dealing with a blatantly badly engineered bezel loom composition made by Satina. And it was just a no-go, a no-no, that just ruined everything about this otherwise great watch. All Satina had to do in order to make the most perfect diving watch ever conceived was to retain the exact same model, only to replace the tedious ETA 2824 with a Powermatic 80 movement of 80 hours power reserve. Replace the badly engineered bezel indices with silver indices of some type of metal and add a dive extension to the bracelet. And they would have had a smashing success of a diving watch that would have elevated Satina as one of the most popular watch brands in history ever. But sadly, the people running Satina are not exactly bright people. In fact, I would say that those Satina associates, especially the management, should never be allowed to run a watch company, and Satina has been making shitty watches ever since, getting even more shittier for each year since Satina's peak in 2014. Hence the reason why I am no longer promoting Satina watches. Now, among one of the dumbest things I've done in my life was selling my beloved Omega Planet Ocean Liquid Metal Limited Edition watch. This watch was a legend. It was an epic watch. And it was a very rare model, only made in 1,948 pieces. It was the world's first watch introducing liquid metal and ceramic technology, which now has become the standard fusion of Omega's of the metals in Omega's watches. And it was just such a nice watch. It was really a nice watch, a gorgeous watch, and I practically loved everything about this watch, except from the bracelet. It was fitted with the Omega 2500 caliber, which happened to be a very popular, and still is, by the way, a very popular movement. And it was such a nice watch. It was just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, luxurious watch, garish in its essence. But it had one flaw. It had one significant defect, and this was all due to the engineering of the bracelet. And it had the very significant defect of unleashing itself in the diver extension. So during summertime, when your wrist was sweaty, if you would move your wrist in a certain manner, the diver extension would unleash itself and the watch would drop very violently from your wrist. And it was very uncomfortable experience to go through. And you would go, well, this is just a minor defect. You just needed to send it in for service at Omega's. But it's not something you do with such an expensive watch. I mean, it was a very expensive watch, and you don't just send one of your favorite watches and an extremely expensive watch in for servicing at some remote place because of a minor defect of in the diver extension. And I was talking to one of my Danish friends who happened to own the Omega Planet Ocean chronograph, and he would tell me the exact same thing. He would say, well, the exact same thing happens to me during summer. It unleashes the dive extension and it drops down from the wrist. And so he would have the exact same experience. So clearly what we are dealing with was a badly engineered bracelet by Omega. And again, it's a no-go. It's an absolute no-no. I mean, you don't get to make such a flimsy bracelet. And this is really sluggish, badly engineered by Omega, that they would make such a perfect watch case. A very heavy watch case on an extremely flimsy, light bracelet. It's not something you do. It's absolutely unforgivable. It's totally unacceptable when you pay so much money for a watch that they have engineered a cheap Chinese flimsy bracelet with what is obviously a badly engineered dive extension, and it just ruined everything. It really ruined everything about this watch, because every time you wore it, you would say, okay, so when does it start dropping from my wrist? And not only that, when it dropped from the wrist, it made you look like an idiot. I mean, you would really appear like a total idiot when you're standing there with your watch, and everyone would turn around and look at you. You're surprised. Look at the surprised expression on your face. So it was a total no-go, and it just ruined everything. And even though it has become 3 or 4 times worth the price that I paid for it back in the day, it would still pose a dilemma owning this watch, knowing that Omega had engineered such a bad dive extension, such a bad, flimsy, Chinese-produced bracelet on such a otherwise garish watch case. One of the watches that I really miss from my previous collection is my Longines Conquest chronograph, sunk Moritz, the Saint Moritz or Saint Moritz special edition skiing watch. It was such a nice watch. It was such a cool, nicely made, nicely conceived, beautifully conceived watch. A real winter skiing watch. That was such a nice watch to wear, especially during winter when watching winter sports in the television. But it had one significant flaw, and it was with a hundredth of a second chronograph. By the way, the subdial, the minute subdial, somewhat difficult to read though. But apart from that, it was such a nice watch. It was such a cool watch with one significant flaw. And this was all made by the fact that the bracelet was so easily scratched. It would turn in scratches on the bracelet so easily that you merely needed to look at it. I mean, all you needed to do was just look at it. By looking at it, it would turn out scratches, dents, like it had been dinged somehow, and it simply became an ordeal. I mean, wearing it simply became an ordeal because you were worried each and every time of how the condition would get less or worsened every time that you had been wearing it on your wrist, because it would scratch so easily that it simply became unbearable. Totally over polished, over polished to an extent where it would be filled with scratches in a matter of a month and depreciate in value, and hence the reason why. Well, one of the main reasons why I sold it, but it was a really cool watch, and I really miss it. And lastly, my epic Omega Speedmaster Broad Arrow 1957, the red 1957, the 50th anniversary watch of the Omega Speedmaster, with 18 karat red gold capped on the links. Now, some dude asked me some years ago whether the red gold was plated or capped, and because of my rather bad English vocabulary, I wasn't able to clearly articulate how it was made, but it was actually capped. It was actually gold capped, 18 karat red gold capped on the links, and you had to be careful not to scratch the links. Otherwise, it would get easily scratched. Now, this was an epic watch, an absolute legend of a watch, and I love it. Without a question, one of the most expensive watches that I have ever owned, and I loved it. But the truth is, I never wore it. I never wore it. I could barely find any suitable occasion of wearing it. Well, maybe at some family gatherings or parties and of some sort, but otherwise, I made it my Christmas watch. I said, well, okay, I'm gonna make it my Christmas watch. I'm gonna wear it during November and December. But even so, I wasn't able to find a suitable occasion for wearing it, except from Christmas parties, of course. But even as a daily wearer, I would feel very uncomfortable wearing it. So I never wore it. And thus I didn't really have any enjoyment from owning it, except from possessing it. But it was a legend of a watch. It did had two significant flaws, however, and one of them being the luster of the two-toned red gold. Now, when you saw it in some special light conditions in daylight or ultraviolet light conditions, it would have a magnificent luster. The red gold would have an absolute magnificent luster. But otherwise, half of the time, when inside during the rather dark winter months, it would have a rather dull and depressing luster on the red gold, and it would be rather dull to look at. Well, sometimes even depressing to look at the brassy coloration of the two tone, and it would not live up to the expectations you had set for owning this watch, knowing what an magnificent luster it otherwise would showcase. But and it had another flaw. The crown was very hard to wind. Now, in my case, my crown was just very tight, and it would actually take you to wash your hands before winding it, and even so, it would gather fat on the crown, so it would become even more difficult to wind as you wound it. And of course, that would also destroy or depreciate some of the enjoyment from owning this watch. But the truth is, I never wore it, and thus I only had very little enjoyment from wearing it. And that was just how it was. Right, so thank you so much for watching this segment of watches that I used to own but felt compelled selling for a very good reason. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.